sharks and osteichthyes. They don't have a neck, and they don't have anywhere for their pelvic girdle to attach to the vertebral column. So they've only got two classes of vertebrae, two regional. Trunk and tail. That's it. And we can see that with this specimen here, and in the back there's a number of old mason jars with some quality of sharks. You can see that. But really, the only thing you need to worry about is how to tell trunk from tail. You already saw a tail with this tuna fish, right? You've seen that before. Now, trunk, these are actually vertebrae that were found on the beach around Cape Canaveral area. Probably black-tip shark. And although we got 4 of them, they're all trunk. And the fact I put this down like this tells you there's a difference. Because I can't put this down because the big hemal arch. Remember, the hemal arch guarded the caudal artery and vein. Caudal, tail, tail vertebra. But these guys don't have a hemal arch. And that's an easy way to tell them apart immediately. Now let me get a little probe to point at things with. But, sorry, thanks. What you can see here that's a little different, we got these little transverse processes that the ribs attach to. Little tiny little ribs, fashion model ribs, really slender. All right, so again, basic parts of a vertebra. A little transverse process here. Here's our body. There's the arch. Here's another vertebra, body and arch. But you'll notice between the two arches, there's a piece of cartilage here. And if it wasn't there, what goes through that arch? The spinal cord, yeah. So if that little piece of cartilage wasn't here and here, the spinal cord would be exposed, which is a bad thing. So these, pardon me?
Does it help with structure at all?
Not too much. So these little pieces of cartilage help to add to protection for the spinal cord. They're called intercalary plates. So vertebral arch, intercalary plate, vertebral arch. Now, when we get into the tail, and you can see this on some of those specimens in the jars, there's also intercalary plates between the hemal arches to better protect the caudal artery and vein. So how do we differentiate them? Relative position, right? So the ones that are on the dorsal part of the vertebral column, dorsal intercalary plates. And the ones between the hemal arches then would be ventral. Does that make sense? It's a little harder to see in the animals because, again, you're looking through a glass jar, through a fluid, to a translucent cartilage. But if you get at the right angle, it looks like jack-o'-lantern teeth. We got one tooth pointed up, and the next tooth pointed down, then the next tooth pointed up, and the next tooth pointed down. That's the way it looks like when you're comparing an arch and the intercalary plate. Okay? So that's easy. Yay, no big problems with this. Let me get a mud puppy. I thought for sure I had taken one. Looks like they've all run away.
That'd be a problem.
Yeah, it would be. Wow, how did I get this away? But mud puppies, of course, and all amphibians are the first vertebrates to evolve to be on land. So now we have a couple of issues. When you're on land, you want to be able to move your head up and down. So now you need a bone to do that. Cervical vertebra. And the pelvis needs to be braced against the vertebral column. So now we have 4 regions: cervical, trunk, sacral, and caudal, tail. All right? Now there's only one cervical vertebra. And I know some of these mud puppies have been put together like they're giraffe mud puppies with giant necks, but there's only one neck bone, okay? Everything from here all the way down to mud puppy tuchus is going to be trunk. Now, some of you are wondering, why don't we differentiate thoracic and lumbar? Well, look at this. They all look the same. And all of them have ribs attached. Now think about your kitty cat. The trunk and the kitty cat's broken up into thoracic and lumbar. And how do you know where one ends and the other begins? Ribs, right? So it's really with mammals that we see the trunk broken up. But in reptiles and amphibians, it's just trunk, unspecialized. In fact, you'd have a hard time telling this vertebra from this vertebra from this vertebra. I would have a hard time. Sacral is really easy. It's the one that the rib connects the sacral vertebra to the pelvis. That specialized rib is called a sacral rib. And that helps to brace the pelvis against the vertebral column. And then we get to the tail, caudal vertebra. And what we see here is something you're also going to see with your little kitty cat, formerly Fluffy, where the first few vertebrae look more like trunk vertebrae because they're anchoring the muscles of the tail. But as you get further away, more distally, the structure becomes reduced. And if you look, most of these vertebrae here, put it on the side, they look like little versions of the tuna fish tailbone. With the body, neural arch, and hemal arch. All right? So that's it. Now, in terms of regional for the practical on the mud puppy, I'm going to give you the whole mud puppy. Which, boy, that makes it easy. I mean, maybe just one little caudal vertebra by itself, but that's the only one I do. Because the rest all look alike. You can't tell them apart. You can only tell by location. All right? So that would something to be aware of. Kitty cat, yeah, those look a lot different. And so you will get individual kitty cat bones on the exam. So actually, I'm going to steal your cat also. So here's our little godless killing machine. And we can see it's pretty easy to tell that they don't all look the same. It's a lot easier than Mud Puppy was. And the reason for that, we'll see when we get into muscles later on, is that going from amphibian to mammal, these animals are much better adapted for life on land. They've got a greater number of muscles, which means more modification of the skeletal structures they attach to. All right? So, we have our neck, cervical vertebra. Our trunk is divided up into that with ribs, thoracic, that without, lumbar, sacrum, which also more sacral vertebra than in the mud puppy, and then caudal. All right? So let's take a look at how you tell them apart. So here's a little vertebra. And at first glance, you're like, well, which regional class of vertebra is this? And I could ask you that on the day of the exam. Wouldn't be a problem. This is a cervical. And the way you know it's a cervical, no matter how weird the cervical looks, it has a pair of holes on the transverse aspect of the vertebra called transverse foramen. And the only vertebra that have transverse foramen are cervical. Because running right up along your cervical vertebra in your neck is an artery, one on each side bringing blood to your brain, called the vertebral artery. The carotid does the bulk of it, but the vertebral helps. All right? So if you see two holes there, you know it's cervical, no matter how weird it looks. And before I go any further, let me quickly review basic features again. There's our body, arch with the pedicle, lamina, spinous process, right? Caudal articulating, cranial down here, because remember, surface is up on cranial, down on caudal, and of course our transverse processes. All right? Now, most of the time, all you need to know is whether it's cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and caudal. But there are two cervical that are so distinct that you need to know them by name. The first one is this one here, atlas. Atlas looks like a wingnut. You can almost see this screwing this down on something.